general, pues, ¿qué esperanza queda de que haya comprensión mundial? ¿Y qué hay de la cooperación para lo cual se establecieron Naciones Unidas para promover? Las democracias son tolerantes por defecto, pero perecen si empiezan a tolerar la intolerancia. Junto con el resto de la Unión Europea, Eslovaquia va a la avanzada hacia una revolución democrática y efectiva de las plataformas y las redes en línea. El espacio en línea se debe regir por las mismas normas democráticas que se aplican fuera de línea. Valoramos toda iniciativa de Naciones Unidas a favor de normas en cuanto a la conducta estatal en el ciberespacio. Los esfuerzos de la llamada Convención Digital de Ginebra es algo que se justifica y necesita. La crisis que he mencionado ha afectado de manera desproporcionada a la mujer y a las niñas, lo cual se da con índices más altos en la violencia de género y doméstica, con más inseguridad económica y pobreza, un peor acceso a la educación y a la atención de la salud. Ahora bien, no he venido a describir a la mujer como la víctima. Más bien, hago un llamado a todas ellas para que refuercen su compromiso y presencia en asuntos públicos. La mujer es el agente del cambio. El mundo tiene la responsabilidad colectiva de apoyarla, porque ya hemos visto las consecuencias de un mundo que se gestiona sin tener en cuenta su experiencia tan especial. Señoras y señores, el tiempo no ha sido muy favorable con las ideas que han fincado y sostenido a esta organización. La paz, que hay que salvaguardar, se deteriora. La cooperación internacional que hemos de fomentar no ha impedido la llegada de la catástrofe climática y el espíritu del patrimonio común que consagran Naciones Unidas se ve bajo el atentado de los extremistas, cuyas voces han multiplicado las nuevas tecnologías. Las medidas a la mitad no son suficientes para lidiar con estos desafíos. Ya lo hemos intentado antes. Llegó el momento de la acción y la claridad. Nosotros, los miembros de Naciones Unidas, tenemos que estar del lado de la víctima y no del agresor. Hay que elegir un orden de normas internacionales y no el poder del revólver. Hay que cumplir los objetivos sobre el clima y adoptar normas para las plataformas de las redes sociales y proteger a sociedades y al orden internacional. Claro que podemos demorar y optar por la venencia, pero la historia nos ha demostrado que ser pasivos al ser pasivos no se resuelven las crisis, nada más se aplaza el momento del ajuste de cuentas. Y observar la menor norma es importante. Por ello, concluyo en este momento para respetar el plazo que se me ha conferido. Gracias. El presidente, en nombre de la Asamblea, doy las gracias a la presidenta de la República Eslovaca y pido al protocolo que acompañe a su excelencia. La Asamblea escuchará al excelentísimo Emmanuel Macron, presidente de la República Francesa, y pido a protocolo que acompañe a su excelencia. En nombre de la Asamblea General, tengo el honor de dar la bienvenida al excelentísimo señor Emmanuel Macron, presidente de la República Francesa, y lo invito a dirigirse a la Asamblea.
Señor presidente de la Asamblea General, señora vicesecretaria general de las Naciones Unidas, señoras y señores jefes de Estado y de Gobierno, señoras y señores embajadores, excelencias, damas y caballeros, es un placer traer aquí la voz de la República Francesa ante este recinto. Pienso en aquellos que han combatido, luchado en mi país, pero también por doquier, en el mundo, para que justamente Francia sea una Francia libre. Aquellos que creyeron que el destino de Europa no podía hacerles indiferentes en otras épocas. A todas y todos aquellos que vengan de América, Asia, Oceanía o Asia, porque creían que esto les incumbía. Pienso en aquellos que redactaron nuestra carta, que construyeron esta organización para luchar contra lo peor, que ocurrió en 2 ocasiones en el siglo XX, infligiendo a la humanidad un sufrimiento indecible. No olvidemos jamás que les estamos endeudados. Esto Hoy tenemos que tomar una decisión sencilla si se lo piensa. Elegir la guerra o la paz. El 24 de febrero último, Rusia, miembro permanente del Consejo de Seguridad, conculcó a través de un acto de agresión, de invasión y de anexión, conculcó nuestra seguridad colectiva. De forma deliberada, violó la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y el principio de igualdad soberana de los Estados. El 16 de marzo, la Corte Internacional de Justicia declaró que la agresión de Rusia era ilegal en su fallo y exigió que se retirasen de Ucrania. Rusia decidió, con este accionar, abrir la puerta a otras guerras de anexión. Hoy en Europa, pero puede ser en Asia, en África o en América Latina a futuro. Podemos decir de todo, hay muchos debates, se ha dicho mucho en las intervenciones, pero hay una cosa de la que estamos seguros. En este mismísimo momento hay tropas rusas en Ucrania y, a mi entender, no hay tropas ucranianas en Rusia. Es un hecho y tenemos que examinarlo. Cuanto más dure esta guerra, cuanto más amenaza suponga para la paz en Europa, será una amenaza para el mundo y genera más conflicto. Y la soberanía y la seguridad de todas y todos no depende de la cantidad de efectivos en los ejércitos, de las alianzas o de las intenciones de las milicias y los grupos armados. Una situación en la que aquellos que se creen poderosos intentan subyugar, como sea, a aquellos que consideran débiles. Desde el 24 de febrero último, estamos frente a un retorno a la edad del imperialismo y de las colonias. Francia lo rechaza tajantemente y vamos a obrar por la paz. Nuestra postura es clara en este sentido. Estamos al servicio de esta postura y por eso asumo el diálogo que se está entablando con Rusia, incluso antes de que se declarara la guerra. A lo largo de los últimos meses hemos estado trabajando en este sentido y seguiremos así, porque así vamos a poder buscar juntos la paz. Buscar la paz a través de las iniciativas que se dieron antes del conflicto para tratar de evitarlo. La búsqueda de la paz desde el 24 de febrero, prestando apoyo económico, militar y humanitario al pueblo de Ucrania para que pueda ejercer su derecho de defensa propia y para preservar su libertad. La búsqueda de la paz, repudiando la invasión de un Estado soberano y de la violación de nuestro principio de seguridad colectiva, de los crímenes de guerra que cometió Rusia en territorio ucraniano y también mediante nuestro rechazo de la impunidad. La justicia internacional tendrá que establecer los hechos y juzgar a los responsables de los crímenes. La búsqueda de la paz también porque estamos a favor de distender la intensidad del conflicto. En este sentido, nos incumbe respaldar los esfuerzos de la OIEA para evitar las consecuencias de la guerra en lo que hace a la seguridad y la integridad nucleares. Lo mismo haremos a futuro con Ucrania, porque no se puede ni cuestionar la integridad y seguridad de su central nuclear. Logramos que una misión visitadora llegara al terreno y estableciera conclusiones para evitar un accidente nuclear cuyas consecuencias serían tremendas. Todos y todas los aquí presentes sabemos que solo un acuerdo basado en el derecho internacional será lo que nos permita restablecer la paz. No se logrará negociación alguna a menos que Ucrania así lo elija de forma soberana y a menos que Rusia lo acepte de buena fe. También somos conscientes de que solo saldrá victoriosa una negociación si se respeta la soberanía de Ucrania, si se garantiza su seguridad y se restablece su integridad territorial. Rusia debe poder entender que no podrá imponerse, incluso por medios militares. Incluso con simulacros de referendo cínicos en territorios que están bombardeados y, hoy por hoy, ocupados. le incumbe a los miembros del Consejo de Seguridad hacer oír este mensaje alto y claro. Y nos incumbe a los miembros de esta asamblea encarrilarnos hacia la paz. Desde esta tribuna, llamo a los miembros de las Naciones Unidas a que actúen para que Rusia renuncie a la guerra, midiendo las repercusiones que esto supone para Rusia, pero también para todos nosotros, para que ponga fin a la agresión. Aquí no se trata de elegir uno u otro bando. No se habla de Occidente y de Oriente, ni de Norte y Sur. Estamos hablando de la responsabilidad que les incumbe a aquellos que tienen el apego por la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y para con el bien más preciado de que disponemos, la paz. Porque más allá de la guerra, se corre el riesgo de una grieta en el mundo, que serían las repercusiones directas e indirectas también de este conflicto. Sé fehacientemente que muchos de los aquí presentes se cobijan un sentir de injusticia ante las repercusiones alimentarias, económicas, energéticas terribles de la guerra que lleva adelante Rusia. Y sé que muchos países aquí representados se han instalado en una suerte de neutralidad respecto de la guerra. Pero voy a hablarles con claridad. ¿Quién quiere sentirse como los no alineados y entonces asumir justamente una responsabilidad? La lucha de los no alineados era en pro de la paz, de la soberanía de los estados, para la integridad territorial. La lucha de los no alineados eso era, pero los que se callan hoy son cómplices y están a favor de la causa de un nuevo imperialismo, de un cinismo contemporáneo que desarticula nuestro tronco internacional, sin el cual no hay paz posible. Rusia intenta instalar una idea de que hay un doble rasero en juego. Pero la guerra en Ucrania no debe dejar a nadie indiferente como conflicto que es. Está cerca de Europa, que decidió apoyar a Ucrania sin entrar en guerra con Rusia. Más alejada para muchos y muchas de ustedes, pero todos resentimos las causas. Y todos tenemos un papel que desempeñar para ponerle punto final, porque todas y todos pagamos un precio. El fundamento mismo de esta guerra de Rusia viola los principios de nuestra organización, barre con los principios del único orden internacional posible que nos permita garantizar la paz, a saber, el respeto de la soberanía nacional y del carácter intangible de las fronteras. En este sentido, no confundamos causa y consecuencia. ¿Quién puede defender la idea de que la invasión de Ucrania no justifica que se imponga sanción alguna? ¿Quién de los aquí presentes podría considerar que si algo les ocurriera así con un vecino, el silencio de la región y del mundo sería la mejor respuesta? ¿Quién podría creer algo así? Que Francia, por ejemplo, que Rusia se corrige, le intérprete, gane esta guerra y que pasemos a otro capítulo. El imperialismo contemporáneo no es europeo ni occidental. Es una invasión territorial sumada a una guerra híbrida mundializada que utiliza el precio de la energía, la seguridad alimentaria, la seguridad nuclear, el acceso a la información y los desplazamientos de población como armas de destrucción y de división. Es en este sentido que esta guerra atenta contra la soberanía de todos nosotros. Francia obrará codo a codo con los pueblos libres de las Naciones Unidas para encarar las consecuencias de este conflicto y de las desigualdades que se derivan, rechazando la lógica de bloque y de alianzas exclusivas. Porque además de las consecuencias directas de la guerra, el riesgo que tenemos que asumir es el de un nuevo orden mundial. Algunos intentan hacernos creer que por un lado está Occidente, que defiende valores trasnochados al servicio de sus intereses, y del otro lado el resto del mundo, que tanto ha sufrido y que intenta cooperar respaldando la guerra, haciendo la vista gorda. Rechazo esta división por dos motivos como mínimo. Primero, por principio. Lo acabo de explicar. Nuestra organización enarbola valores universales. No permitamos que se instale esta idea de que en la Carta hay algo que es de carácter regional o que se puede adaptar. Nuestra organización tiene valores universales y la división ante la guerra en Ucrania es muy sencilla. Uno está a favor de la ley del más fuerte, el no respeto de la integridad territorial de los países y de la soberanía nacional, o uno está a favor o en contra de la impunidad. Para mí no hay orden internacional alguno ni paz duradera alguna que no, no esté anclada en el principio de responsabilidad y de respeto de los pueblos. Así que lo confirmo, nuestros valores son universales y por eso
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Global Food Security Summit. Please welcome to the stage the summit co-chairs, the President of the European Council, the President of the Republic of Senegal and Chairperson of the African Union, the President of the Government of Spain, the Secretary of State of the United States. Please welcome to the podium His Excellency, Charles Michel, President of the European Council.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, welcome to this Global Food Security Summit, and a special thanks to my colleagues that are here today with me, President Sall of Senegal and Chair of the African Union, Prime Minister Sanchez, President of the Government of Spain, and Secretary of State Blinken from the United States. Together, we will co-chair this event, and let me thank you for your participation in this important meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, food security is the major global challenge today, and this food crisis is being exacerbated by Russia's war against Ukraine. It impacts every country, and we need to adapt our response to local needs. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, over 200 million people in the world are in acute need of food, and even more may lose their lives to hunger. This is not acceptable. This is not sustainable. Famine is looming in many parts of the world, and now it's time for all of us to translate our political commitments into concrete action. This crisis goes far beyond food. In fact, we are facing a cost of living crisis, a crisis caused by the perfect storm of food, energy, and economic challenges. We represent together the different regions of the world, and we must harness the momentum of each initiative: the Global Alliance on Food Security, the Roadmap Call to Action, FARM, or the African Emergency Food Production Facility, and others. We are here together to find solutions collectively, together with Africa and together with the rest of the world. We need more coordination, we need more money, and in the European Union, we are stepping up our efforts with our member states. We have put forward a comprehensive global food security response of nearly 8 billion euros until 2024 to provide humanitarian relief, along with short-term and longer-term solutions, especially to countries most in need, particularly in Africa. And getting grains out of Ukraine has been one of our top priorities. Our EU-Ukraine solidarity lanes have carried more than 10 million tons of food products, and the UN-led Black Sea Grain Initiative is making a real difference. It is getting food to countries most in need and helping to stabilize markets. And contrary to Russia's disinformation, this food is getting to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Another priority is to tackle the shortage of fertilizers. We need to develop capacities for production, especially in Africa. What we did with vaccine manufacturing capacities can be, in my opinion, should be an inspiration. We discussed this idea in the G7 meeting in Germany with the participation of Macky Sall and Cyril Ramaphosa. None of us can do this alone. We know that the United States also launched the Global Fertilizer Challenge, and we need to get others on board: donors, government, banks, and private companies. We need to make sure all our global initiatives are well coordinated and tailored to the needs of the most vulnerable. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Russia's war against the people of Ukraine is a test of our international rules-based order. And we are here this afternoon to rally the forces that believe in global cooperation to make the world a better and safer place. We trust the United Nations, which has a central role in coordinating the international response to this crisis. I am convinced that only together we will make progress. I am convinced that only together we will get the job done. I thank you. Et maintenant, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, j'ai...
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, I have the great pleasure to give the floor to my friend, the President of Senegal and the current chair of the African Union. Macky Sall, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Charles. Excellencies, distinguished heads of states and governments, Secretary Blinken, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to greet and thank the co-organizers of this meeting on world food security and its crisis, the European Union, Spain, and the United States of America, along with Senegal. I would also like to thank our guests, whose massive presence is a reflection of our common concerns in the face of this major challenge. In a way, and without wanting to sound too dramatic, the current situation is reminiscent of the situation in the world at the end of World War II, which then led UNGA to adopt on February 14, 1946, a resolution on the world shortage of grains and other foodstuffs. This was February 14, 1946. It is as though history is repeating itself. The latest report published by the FAO on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, it shows that more than 800 million people are currently suffering from hunger, which is an increase of 150 million people since the onset of the COVID pandemic. This situation has further deteriorated with the impact of the war in Ukraine, which led to a sharp rise of the prices of food, fertilizers. Fertilizers have become 3 times as more expensive than in 2021. The price of hydrocarbons has gone up, and we are also seeing uncertainties on the market for gas and a rising cost of transportation and logistics. All of this is compounded by the effects of climate change. When a crisis of this magnitude hits the world, every single country suffers, especially those most vulnerable ones, which is why it is important for us to work together to find concerted solutions. What is urgent today is to work together in order to ensure openness and transparency of markets for grains and fertilizers so that all countries can have access to them in accordance with international trade rules. I would like to insist on the topic of fertilizers and fertilizer markets. We are importing a lot in Africa. When you look at rice, millet, corn, soy, cassava, and other speculations, if there are no fertilizers, we will have a famine. And the World Food Program will not be able to face this challenge. But beyond the situational solutions we can look at, we need to make sure that the right conditions are there for sustainable agricultural production through a proactive approach and substantial resources. Let's take the example of Senegal. in spite of the crisis, in 2 years, we increased our budget for agricultural campaigns, which corresponds to our rainy season. We've also implemented a number of programs to work with young people and women in order to accelerate our process of food sovereignty. At the continental level, Africa, since 2004, has had a strategic framework in place with the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program. In May of last year, the African Development Bank launched an African emergency plan for food production with $1.5 billion with the objective of producing 37.6 million tons of foodstuffs. This was funded with a total of $1.2 billion, and this happened extremely rapidly and with a lot of fluidity, and we would like to thank the African Development Bank. These $1.13 billion were dispersed to 26 countries. In an emergency situation, we cannot continue to do business as usual. We need emergency solutions. For greater cohesion and impact, it would be advisable to see how the different initiatives from France, the Farm Initiative, the Food and Agricultural Resilience Mission, and Germany with its Global Alliance for Food Security, as well as other initiatives in Europe, we'd like to see how they could be harmonized with those of the African Development Bank and the U.S., so that we can have a common framework for action and efficiency. Finally, with regard to cooperation with Africa in the field of agriculture, I would like to remind you that it is important to change the paradigms, to go beyond the idea of official development and humanitarian assistance. We know that Africa is full of agricultural land and water resources and has the potential to feed itself and help the rest of the world feed itself. What is needed for both agriculture and fertilizers is renewed partnerships that are based on complementarities in natural resources, investment and technology to produce more, to transform, and to create a shared prosperity. To conclude, I would like to announce that a joint statement could be adopted to reflect the final results of our meeting today. Thank you very much.
Je souhaite remercier le président Macky Sall.
I'd like to thank President Macky Sall for his work and for speaking on behalf of the continent of Africa.
Pass the floor to the Prime Minister of Spain, dear Pedro Sánchez. You have the floor.
Good afternoon.
All over the world gathered virtually in Madrid with one goal: reinforcing multilateralism together. Now, almost 2 years later, our informal leaders network gathers again. Our goal this time is to provide a space for an open and inclusive discussion to address one of the most pressing and urgent challenges the world is facing today: the food insecurity crisis and its dreadful impact on the most vulnerable people. I would like to start by thanking President Macky Sall, as current chair of the African Union and an active member of our leaders network, President Michel and Secretary Blinken for joining forces with us co-organizing this Global Food Security Summit. The current food security crisis has many root causes, but one thing is for sure: the only way to overcome it is through a multilateral approach. Russia must end its illegal war against Ukraine, which has threatened an essential source of the world's food supply. The truth is that Putin is trying to blackmail the international community with a large part of the world's food needs. And as we strive for peace, it is urgent to take measures that protect the most vulnerable and prevent the situation from getting worse. In that vein, there are 4 clear principles that should guide us. The first, let us support multilateral solutions. In that sense, I would like to commend the work done by the UN Secretary General facilitating the landmark Black Sea Grain Initiative, which is already helping international food prices to drop and enabling vulnerable people access food, as well as the creation of the UN Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy and Finance. Second, coordination. President Sall talked about it. Coordination is of the essence to be efficient as possible in channeling all our efforts and avoiding overlaps and duplications. We fully support other initiatives that have been launched, like the Global Alliance for Food Security, the Farm Initiative, or the Roadmap for Global Food Security Call to Action, but they must be aligned and complementary. In this regard, the Committee on World Food Security can play a vital role, and its mandate should be strengthened. Third, we must promote an open, transparent and predictable trade environment. I plead countries to refrain from stockpiling key staple commodities and from adopting export restrictions on food and key agricultural inputs, which only exacerbate food security problems. And four, we must all do our part. The European Union, as President Michel stated, has already articulated several tools and initiatives, and as the world's largest donor, is working hard to address this crisis. But we need to do more to keep ameliorating our response, including by removing bureaucratic obstacles to trade in agricultural products and inputs. My country has made food security a priority of our development policies for a long time, and we will continue to do so. However, we know there is still a lot to do. In order to redouble our efforts, Spain will allocate 151.5 million euros and mobilize another 85 million euros in loans during the coming 3 years. With this money, we will contribute to do the work of specialized international organizations as well as the programs of our National Development Agency. Dear friends, to conclude, we are running out of time. If farmers don't get fertilizers at the right moment, poor or even lost harvest will continue to worsen the situation. We must arrive on time. And let me be clear, there is no peace with hunger, and we cannot combat hunger without peace. The world is expecting much from us. Let's act together. Let's act now. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Pedro Sánchez, and thank you for your personal commitment. Thank you for your leadership, and to make sure that we are able to build broad political coalition in order to tackle this important challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, the following speaker is chairman of the G7, and he's playing a very important role in order to make sure that this important body also is involved in order to deliver. I would like to pass the floor to the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. Please, you have the floor.
Excellencies and dear colleagues, I'm grateful to speak at this important event. And I thank the European Union, the United States, Spain and Senegal for also keeping food security at the top of our agenda. It is clearly the leitmotif of this General Assembly that the world is facing multiple crises. We need to act with great urgency to curb the rise of food insecurity. The Russian war of aggression has caused an exacerbated a multidimensional global crisis. Countries in the global south with prior vulnerabilities have been hit hardest. Next year may be even more difficult. Looking at the increase in energy and fertilizer prices, we must be prepared for food prices to rise as well. Important commitments and initiatives have already been undertaken. I look forward to tomorrow's meeting at the Secretary General's Global Crisis Response Group. The UN have also achieved a diplomatic success with the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and it is crucial that Russia continues to fully implement it and does not stop. We must not believe Russia's disinformation. Data clearly shows that the majority of grain exports facilitated goes to developing and emerging countries and has global impacts on grain availability and prices. In my capacity as G7 presidency this year, I have put this issue of food security high on our agenda. At our summit in Elmau, leaders pledged additional $4.5 billion for global food security and nutrition, a clear message of global solidarity. We also launched the Global Alliance for Food Security. Jointly with the World Bank, we aim to effectively strengthen and coordinate our global political action, and we held a United for Global Food Security conference in Berlin with over 60 international delegations participating. Let me take this opportunity to invite all actors, governments, the private sector, civil society, and the research community to join the Global Alliance for Food Security. Germany has more than doubled its already significant annual budget for global food security and is providing roughly 4 billion euros this year. But besides the immediate emergency response, we need to secure the next harvest seasons, mainly in countries in the global south. Fertilizer and seeds need to be affordable and accessible. Colleagues, we are facing the consequences of insufficient global action to tackle the climate crisis. The latest assessment report by the IPCC made clear that climate and weather extremes expose millions of people to acute food insecurity. Science clearly shows that extreme events will happen more often with every degree of warming. In this regard, the 1.5-degree limit to global warming is key. It is essential that at COP27 in Egypt in 2 months' time, all countries help to create the political commitment and momentum for ambitious climate action. We have a shared interest and a shared responsibility to tackle the global food security crisis. We need to see action now in different areas, working short-term and long-term consequences of the crisis. Let us join forces and let us each play our best possible roles in helping to tackle food insecurity and save lives, today and in the future. Thank you.
I would like to thank you, Chancellor Scholz. Thank you for your personal commitment. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for making Germany an important actor to address together with the international community this global food security. Et maintenant, je vais m'adresser en français pour accueillir le plus francophone.
I would like now to give the floor to the most francophone of all English speakers.
Anthony, the United States are playing a very important role. I'm very pleased that we are able together to make this event possible. And then when I observe the representation in that room, I am optimistic because there is a lot of power, of political will in that room. I think together we can make sure it will be possible to change things and to take the best possible decisions in order to deliver. I have the great honor, the great pleasure to welcome Anthony Blinken, State Secretary. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
President Michel, President Sall, Chancellor, Thank you all so much for being part of this today. Let me actually start by inviting another colleague to the stage, President Petro of Colombia. Would you please join us if you're here? And maybe he's not. There we are. Mr. President. We have a number of co-hosts for this event, including the Chancellor, including President Petro, including my friend, the Foreign Minister of Indonesia, Retno, who is here somewhere as well, and a number of other colleagues from across the world who are joining forces to address an issue of acute urgency for countries around the world. At the outset of 2022, conflicts, COVID-19, the effects of the climate crisis had already driven more than 190 million people into acute food insecurity. According to the World Food Program, President Putin's brutal war of aggression in Ukraine may add 70 million people on top of that, an already staggering number becoming even more staggering. In May, I had the opportunity to speak about these issues at the UN Security Council, a meeting that the United States convened on the link between food insecurity and conflict. We also chaired a food security ministerial here at the United Nations, where we launched one of the initiatives you've heard about already, the Roadmap for Global Food Security, a call to action. It calls on member states to take 7 actions, which include keeping food and agricultural markets open, increasing fertilizer production, investing in climate-resilient agriculture. More than 100 countries have signed on to the roadmap. Many are already acting on those commitments. Action is crucial because the current crisis is one that no individual country or even group of countries can solve alone. And that's why we're here together. The work before us is clear. First, we have to get emergency aid to the people who need it. Since February, the United States has provided more than $6.1 billion in humanitarian assistance and $2.3 billion in development aid to combat hunger and strengthen food security. I'm proud to say that we're consistently the largest donor to the World Food Program, providing more than half of all contributions. Some countries with the capacity to do more are among those doing the least. That needs to change. And no matter what countries have done so far, every country is called upon to do more. Tomorrow, the United States will do just that when President Biden announces new assistance from the United States. Another way that we can support immediate relief is by pushing for an extension of the deal that the United Nations and Turkey brokered between Russia and Ukraine, which has allowed for grain and other agricultural products to be exported from Black Sea ports. Now, that agreement should never have been necessary in the first place. The only reason it was is because Russia, having invaded Ukraine, was then blockading its ports and preventing food that had been feeding the world from getting out. But we had to deal with the reality before us, and the deal that was brokered by the United Nations with Turkey's assistance actually enabled the grain to start moving again. And as you've heard from my colleagues, despite some of the misinformation that continues to come from Moscow, that grain and other food products are getting where they need to go, to the countries most in need, predominantly in the global south. It's also helped lower food prices around the world. So it needs to keep going. It needs to be renewed. That is urgent. Second, we have to strengthen the global food systems and help countries develop the capacity to produce their own food so that we can prevent new crises and build resilience to further shocks. You heard President Sall say it very eloquently. We need durable agricultural production. We have to respond to the emergency, but we also have to set ourselves up for the long term. Back in May, when we hosted the Food Ministerial, many of our African colleagues especially made clear that as much as they needed emergency relief, what they really needed was more investment in agricultural innovation, sustainability, self-sufficiency. I am convinced from the time that I've spent recently in a number of countries in Africa, the capacity is there, but it needs help, and we need to help. We have heard that call. Over the next 5 years, the United States will work with our Congress to invest over $11 billion worldwide toward this goal of durable agricultural production. Last month, we added 8 new African partners to Feed the Future. This is our flagship program to broaden social safety nets, to strengthen food systems, to improve nutrition. Many of those countries are represented here today. Investments like these are also critical to adapting to the growing effects of the climate crisis that we're seeing across the globe, from the droughts in the Horn of Africa to the floods in Pakistan. Third, we need to better coordinate our efforts, and you've heard this again already this afternoon, across governments, across regional bodies, across foundations, across NGOs, across multilateral organizations, and others. It's true, there are a multiplicity of initiatives. We need to make sure that they are acting, working together, that all of this is coherent and all of this is coordinated. One way that we can do that is to ensure that sanctions do not impair access to food or medicine in any country beyond just Russia and Ukraine. And to that end, the United States intends to work with other Security Council members to ensure that food, medicine, humanitarian assistance are always carved out across UN sanctions regimes. We'll also expand efforts to ensure such humanitarian authorizations are included across U.S. domestic sanctions programs, something that we're already doing, but we need to do this in a consistent way. We can also make clear that our food security efforts are more transparent. The United States will soon publish a report tracking our progress toward hitting the goals in the roadmap that we put out in May, from boosting assistance levels to launching new programs like the Caribbean Zero Hunger Plan, which was created with CARICOM in the Dominican Republic. And we urge others to publish their own reports so that, again, we can better fill gaps and avoid duplication among us. This unprecedented gathering and the leaders' declaration that we produced is another way that we're strengthening our cooperation. I hope that all countries here consider it and endorse it and encourage others to do so as well. But maybe most important, beyond what we say, is of course what we do. Not only for the good of the people around the world bearing the brunt of this crisis, but also because the health, the stability, the well-being of our people depends on the food security that we build together. With that, I would now like to turn the microphone over to our colleague, President Petro of Colombia. Mr. President, the floor is yours. Thank you.
President of the European Council, Charles Michel, President of the Republic of Senegal and President of the African Union, Macky Sall, President of the Government of Spain, Pedro Sánchez, Secretary of State of the United States of America, Anthony Blinken, Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, heads of state, prime ministers that make up this summit. I have certain concerns about the concept of food security as it has been used in Colombia and elsewhere in Latin America. Food security has been understood as a world in which there would be free trade in foodstuffs such that the whole world could be fed. In practice, what we've seen is that despite the fact that the planet indeed has achieved the capacity to produce sufficient nutrients for the whole world, even more than they need, part of humanity is hungry, and hunger grows. The concept in itself has not played out, has not borne out, and not so much given the impediments to world food trade, but in addition to the capacity to produce food and offer sufficient food, there is a problem of inequality between supply and demand and effective revenues. There's a category known as prices. Part of humanity simply cannot afford to pay the price, the market price for food. And hunger and famine result from that, and also vulnerability to this lack of food. And it's not just of millions of people that suffer this, but hundreds of millions of people. There is a fundamental problem in the concept itself of food security. And that is that what isn't taken into account is mankind or humanity's unequal income. That's why in Colombia, when we talked about this, I was one of those opposed to this topic, this free market approach to food security. And now, when I hear the Secretary of State of the United States talk about something we now refer to as food sovereignty for countries with a certain productive capacity to produce food, it's absolutely necessary that before anything else, its land, its water, its economic capacity produce the minimum food that its own population requires. That's a different concept. To enable different countries in different continents to be able to feed their own population under this concept of food sovereignty might be a far more effective step than the prior concept or the mercantilist food security concept. And then you have other social players involved in the political landscape, as well as the multinational corporations involved in food and seed production, which actually has a grave effect on greenhouse gas emissions, such as beef production has amply shown. And there are other social players, parties involved, which we need to empower. For example, rural women, peasant workers who, far from disappearing, are still, in many countries, persist, and they are a key part of the production of food for humanity. Now, the case of Colombia is an extreme case. Truth be told, our country enjoys a great food production capacity, not only to satisfy its own population's needs, but also to export to the world. However, we don't do it. Close to 30 million hectares that have the potential of producing food for our country and the world, we only use 6. The rest are just open fields for a very unproductive ranching model, pasture lands, but that's a pre-modern concept of land use, and that has turned land into a symbol of power, such as existed during feudalism, and not an instrument of production to meet people's needs, which capitalism has laid bare. Now, this archaic approach was aggravated by the concept of food security, given that food is relatively inexpensive for us, those of us who export oil and coal when prices were high. It made a lot more sense for us to import food than produce it. And so 13 million tons of food we imported, half of which was corn. And when corn was discovered by mankind in our lands, we import from the United States and from Canada, which is more productive if measured by tons per hectare than in Colombia, that is corn production, but is more intensive in the consumption of fossil fuels than is the case in Colombia. Which of the two measures fits best to address the current problem? So we have asked the United States to rethink this problem that could go beyond Colombia or Latin America, that is to make the best use of the productive capacity of fertile land, that is food and water, to feed. That feed people should be a priority. And that implies the concept of food sovereignty. As we understand in Colombia, it also entails a different political outlook on land use, not just a symbol of power of some oligarchs in our countries and an instrument of power. It also means that this isn't a zero-sum game. And so the transnational and large corporations, which are highly productive as far as production per hectare and unproductive in the amount of greenhouse gases that are produced, protecting the rural workers. And most of those agricultural workers are women who care for land, earth, and water traditionally, especially in those countries in which there is still the peasant class, and also to protect, as a matter of status of the UN, resulting from international treaties. With this special and privileged outlook, especially even in the signing of free trade agreements, if Colombia could transform itself politically, and that's certainly one of my goals, its land could produce food, not only enough for itself, but for the world. It could be the platform of industrialization. If the peasantry were economically, politically empowered, Colombia, Anthony, would no longer be a country of drug traffickers. It's going in the opposite way of what has been the misnomer of the war against drugs. If we produced more of our own corn and imported less, then we would less from the U.S. We would export less. If we imported less corn, we would export less cocaine. And that would lead to a more peaceful country, no war. Violence in Colombia was built around the holding of lands that are unproductive and the fact that land is simply a symbol of power and not an instrument of production. Now, if you look at the map of Ukraine, with this I will conclude, and you were to superimpose that on Colombia and Venezuela, in the high plains of our countries, to the north of the Amazon jungle and the south of the Andean mountains, the flat, high plains lands, and you will see that Ukraine is half the size of that land, which has far more water than Ukraine, and it can't be blocked by Turkey or any other power because it's exactly halfway between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And yet food isn't produced there. Investments need to be made. A train could be built, as we see in the movies of the far west of the United States, opening up a new agricultural frontier, as the World Bank likes to say, that would consider this to be the last food frontier for humanity, with as much potential or even more than Ukraine. We just don't have the resources to open up that frontier, which, among other things, would help to alleviate the economic burden and pressure on the Amazon jungle region. There is an opportunity for investments there. Perhaps in other parts of the world, we could do the same thing. And what needs to happen is for there to be cooperation, a win-win situation, to open up this agricultural frontier, to raise the supply of food with certain limitations to ensure environmental rights and the rights of the people, rural livers and workers, and also in line with food sovereignty over and above this concept of food security, this global concept. There should first and foremost be a concept of rights, that every nation have the ability to produce the minimum amount of food to feed its own people, which is what we call food sovereignty. These outlooks and perspectives, that's what I want to put on the table now. Can we raise this to the category of world right, this concept of food sovereignty? Can we, in treaties of free trade, add a safeguard clause allowing for food sovereignty? Could we raise to world status the right of prioritizing the use of fertile land, not for oil production for cars, but for the production of food for people, given that climate change will bring with it a loss of fertility, a loss of land, a loss of water, and a loss of nutritional traits in the plants we grow? Could the UN bypass this whole concept of food security, this mercantilist approach, and to prioritize the use of fertile lands, arable lands, making that something that has its own rights, and also prioritizing giving rights to the women, the rural workers in the countryside. Thank you very much.
At this time, we ask that you please remain in your seats as the press departs. The plenary session will begin momentarily. The President